Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is a writer and author working on the worlds of Forgotten Realms, Arkham Horror, and Cobalt City, not to mention so much more. Please welcome Rosemary Jones to Epic Realms. Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine, and thank you so much for inviting me. I've been
Happy Monday.
enjoying the Happy Monday. I've been enjoying the podcast. I was going to tell you, I was doing my homework over the weekend and listening to several back episodes.
I appreciate that. It means a
Yeah,
lot to me.
yeah.
Your career has had a handful of unique jobs throughout time. Not just writing, because obviously you're here, you've done a lot of writing, but you've done a lot of other stuff than just writing
I
stories, whether it's, work with medical journals or public relation jobs, maritime magazine. Do
uh,
you have any fun stories from any of those weird other jobs that aren't related to
uh,
writing?
okay. I zig and I zag a lot as a career. I think the predominant thing, because people have asked me like, how did you get into doing this?
Right.
Is I have always been a writer. I've always known I would be a writer. I'm actually the child of a writer. My mother writes under the name Phoebe Matthews and has had more than 30 books out at this point. When I was a kid, she was working with all the New York publishers, had an agent at Writer's House, all that stuff. My grandfather was actually a journalist. He ran a small town newspaper until he figured out if you run a small town newspaper and have five daughters and actually want to eat, you probably should have another job. So he got talked into becoming a professor of journalism by a friend
Okay.
who said, like, when your girls get old enough, they can all go to college for free because you're teaching for the state school, which seemed like a deal to him. So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of writing in my background, and I just always assumed I would be a writer. I went to school as a journalism major, and when I got out of college, there wasn't a lot of journalism jobs around, so I started like taking jobs that were sort of adjacent to like selling advertising for a maritime magazine. And then I got into writing and running a publishing um, house for a naturopathic college,
Okay.
Bastyr College up here in Seattle. Then I ran a bookstore for a while with some business partners, and then that sort of folded. And so then I went back into publishing and writing, and I ended up doing PR for Seattle Opera,
Okay.
which I always say was like the temp job that was supposed to last 1 year because they were opening a new opera house. It actually lasted 6 years. And I went from there to doing marketing, writing. I got hired by this internet company to do this new thing called social media. They had a MySpace page. They didn't
Oh,
know what
MySpace.
to
That's
do
going
with
back.
it. Yeah, they didn't know what it is. This was 2008. They had like zero idea what to do with it. And I said, well, I'm a writer. I mean, I can put out content. I'll figure this out. And then they were like, well, there's this thing called MySpace and there's this thing called Twitter, and we want to be on there too. And so I sort of became a de facto social media specialist for them. And then that kind of grew. And then I was a director of marketing for about 10 years for another college called the Kurdish College of the Arts, and then later for the National Nordic Museum. And these days, I am a happy full-time writer. I mostly just concentrate on the fiction stuff. I do a little consulting on the side. So
Okay.
that's the abbreviated
The abbreviated
resume.
version. Do you have any fun stories from any of those other jobs? Anything that stands out to you?
Oh, well, they're all fun. I mean, like I said, they all sort of inform the writing. So if you've been following along, you will know in my novels, there's little bits and pieces, and you can almost pretty much tell where I am. I go
Right.
back and look at them, I can tell where I am in my jobs. Like, there's a lot of talk about singing in Crypt of the Moaning Diamond, which is my very first Wizards of the Coast novel. And that was because at that time I was working for the opera company, and people kept saying, "Oh, you work for the opera. You must be, really musical." And I cannot sing. I
You
mean, I
can't
am
hold a
really,
note with
I
me.
can't hold a note worth beans. And and so I had a heroine who could not sing, largely because I was working in an office of people who could actually harmonize on Happy Birthday. And I was just like, I'm in so much trouble here. But I mean, it was so fun. I mean, I got to go behind the scenes. I got to see how
Right.
people did their craft. And through all of this too, I think another important thing to know is for years, my side gig, I guess you would call it, was I was writing arts entertainment columns for first a newspaper chain here in Seattle that was known as Pacific Media, and they did all these little neighborhood newspapers. And then when they kind of folded again around 2008 when I was doing social media, I was working for a website called The Examiner, which I was their Seattle arts and entertainment writer. And so I was interviewing all these different artists and writers about, why do you create? Why do you
Right.
do what you do? And that all kind of folds into my stuff as I go. And I have met some amazing people over the years. Like Bob Mackey is the costume designer who says, he will go to his grave. It'll be carved on his grave that he did the sheer dress for Cher. That was the big
Right.
thing back in the day on Time magazine. But he also did the curtain dress for Carol Burnett for the Gone with the Wind scene.
Okay.
And he and I were talking about, how he started out as a very television costume designer who had to just grab whatever material he had and throw it, onto Carol Burnett to just make her costumes. But it was very much, we only have a day to do this kind of thing, and we just have to hack this thing together to, these days he designs costumes for Broadway plays. He designs costumes for the Barbie doll. He does all this stuff. So, I mean, he had a fascinating career. And, just the chance to meet those people over the
Yeah.
years has been amazing.
That's really cool. When you were growing up, were you big into like reading and writing as well, or was it
Mm,
just when you started to get older in like high school and college?
no, I was always a reader. I read before I went to school. I probably started reading when I was about 5.
Okay.
So I'm one of those kids that by the time I hit first grade and they handed me Dick and Jane, which was the thing when I was in first grade, I was like, uh, what is this? What is this? Dick runs, Spot
Right.
runs, Jane runs. Like, I, could I read The Wizard of Oz now? Because I have that book,
Right. And they're like,
I,
"What? You're already reading that?"
yeah, yeah. So that was, and I was allowed to bring my own books and read chapter books because I was, I was a big reader. And yes, I started writing very small, writing various stories and very bits of stories. And my mother is a professional writer, had a lot of novels out, and she was selling to Scholastic and other publishers. Really, by the time I was in high school, I'm trying to think, like maybe middle grade, but definitely by the time I was in high school, she had books out, and she would often hand me her manuscripts
Hmm.
to proof. I just remember that as like being kind of one of those early
Yeah.
jobs I got paid a few bucks to go through the blue line and mark things if I saw them that I got missed. And this was back in the days when everything got shipped back and forth in actual
Right.
hard copy. There was no computers. What are
Right.
computers?
Was that a
So
challenge for you having a parent that was already published? Was there like pressure, like, man, how am I going to live up to this? Or was it more like, hey, you're getting all this support? Because I can see that there being two sides of that.
I think be both. I don't think she ever told me not to write. I think she was always very supportive, whatever I was. Both of my parents were. My dad was an engineer. My dad was always confused by my life of bouncy jobs. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he was a man who, um, he served in the Air Force. He went and got his college degree. He went and got into his job at Lockheed, which is where he worked all of his life. I mean, after that, I mean, he did, decades at that and retired from that job. Um, so he was not a guy who bounced. I mean, he had bounced around a lot as a young man,
Hmm.
but not, once he was out of the service, he was pretty steady on his little career path and what he was going to do. And so he was always very sweet. He was always very supportive. He was always like, honey, when are you going to get a job, a real job? Like you're working for a maritime magazine that just went under and now you're going off and you're working for I worked for a while for a kind of a Nintendo spin-off type. They were doing
Oh, we're losing you. You froze. We got you frozen.
Nintendo games. Are you sure? And
Are you
I,
there?
oops,
You
I'm
froze up.
there.
You completely froze up
Oh
on
no.
us.
Oh no. Well, I will tell you that my internet will occasionally bounce, but hopefully we'll
It's all
pray
right. We'll get it
to the
figured out.
gods that it'll hold. Yeah, so that was just saying, no, I think both of my parents were always very supportive of me writing. They were very supportive of me doing odd jobs and doing all the things. And I always told them, you're really the worst thing for a writer. You're a totally functional family. So I look to all the strange jobs for the dysfunction that gets into the books.
Well, and you mentioned that you used a lot of the stuff in your writings, like so you learn from
Yeah,
that. So that's
yeah,
always good to write. And a lot of people say write what you know, right?
yeah. Yeah, no, I may not know ambulatory skeletons and Cthulhu and all the rest, but I know people. And I think that's what you get when you read my books is the people in them I always try to make them as real as possible. And they are not any one person I know, but they are aspects of people I know. And they are certainly always aspects of me. And
Yeah.
I change over the years. And I can kind of, and that's sort of the funny thing now. It's like after nearly 20 years of writing the short stories and the novels, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember that Rosemary. She was different than the one that's standing here right now. But yeah, it's fun.
It's kind of well documented the story of the Forgotten Realms contest, right? That your
Yes.
start and how like your first book kind of came to be. Um, how much was your knowledge of D&D around that time, and did it come from gaming or did it come from the novels?
My knowledge of D&D at the time I entered a contest to write The Maiden of Pain
Mm-hmm.
novel, which that is the contest that has become infamous ever since. I lost. They didn't want a rom-com. Who knew? But I didn't know a ton. I'd played in college a lot. I mean, I played solidly for about 4 years in college. But after I got out of college, the people I played with went other directions. I just didn't have a team or game or anything. So when in 2005, Wizards finally took one of my pitches and said, "Okay, yeah, you can write for us," and I started down that path. I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's changed." So then I was buying tons and tons and tons of rule books. I had a whole big shelf of all the fourth edition stuff because remember I Crypt was fourth edition.
Right.
And then of course that all like then, like literally that was the end of fourth edition.
Right. Right.
And they went, "Oh yeah, we're changing it all again." And I'm like, "No. No, you guys are kidding. I got a whole." So me and everybody else was going, I have a whole shelf. But then they sent me all the stuff for 5e and that was the next book, City of the Dead. Yeah. I
That's nice.
learned it and then I got back into playing because I was writing.
Do you still play now or
Oh yeah, I just had a game last night.
nice? Do you prefer to be this is I say this all the time. Do you prefer to be a game master or do you prefer to be a player in your games where you play? Because that's always a
I'm
question
a,
I bring up here.
I'm always a player. I am always a player. I have never actually run a game. Because I don't know. I'm never. I'm not a rules person. I think you've had Nate Crowder on, and
Yeah.
Nate is my GM.
Okay.
And as Nate might have told you, I tend to improvise in games. I'm not real heavy on the rules, but I will come up with a squeaky dog to distract the wolves when they attack me.
That's my kind of play. That's how I like to play too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like
I
to
like
find
the I
creative, unique uses of my environment to throw
yeah.
things
Yeah,
off.
I will improv. I like the improv part of it. I like the storytelling part of it. I do, I'll try to stay on the rules and not annoy the GM too much. But I'm like I said, I'm not one of those people who ever builds the super character. Like I play with some guys who are really good at it, who can say, okay, if I do this, this, and this is gonna be build the unbeatable
Yeah.
whatever wizard, paladin, mage combo. But I'm not that person.
You mentioned that you had done some D&D in college
Hmm.
before that whole
Yeah, yeah.
situation. What was your introduction to D&D? Like how did that come to you originally the very first
Well,
time?
like a lot of young ladies in college, I got started because I had a boyfriend who wanted to run a campaign,
Okay.
and he was recruiting, and he said, "You can play this thing." And I was sort of aware of it. I think I knew from other friends. I didn't know anybody in high school who played. I was a theater kid in high school and a debate kid, and those two things kept me pretty busy. And so I think I kind of had heard about D&D, but I hadn't actually played until my freshman year of college, which I was dating this guy. He wanted to run this campaign, and he wanted to run an evil campaign. So I think maybe his main buds, because this was a non-rules thing, they were like, nah. And so I joined it, and it was super fun. I played a witch, which was not a character out of the uh, books, but it had been done in the dragon.
Right.
So find that issue of the dragon, you'll know when I was playing. There you go. And yes, I played this witch, and then she turned out to be a super powerful magic user because she was kind of a combo wizard druid. Like she had nature spells as well as magic spells. I mean, to the point that the other guys in the campaign were like, like we don't think they double checked this because I was like taking out small dragons and
Right,
stuff.
right.
But
It's like it was a little
yeah,
broken.
I was a little broken, yeah. But we had an evil paladin. We had a sorcerer wizard whose goal was to become a lich. Yeah, so he was actually moving toward trying to become the undead king.
Okay.
And I think and the other gal, there's another gal in the campaign, and she was I think an assassin thief, as I recall. And the really strange, strange part of all this is okay. So there's my friends in college, and they all showed up in Seattle for WorldCon this year. So we all went out to
Oh,
brunch. So
that's
I got to
great.
go to brunch with my, and this was all back in the 80s. So I was like, okay, it's the Stranger Things brunch. I just reunited with my first D&D group.
That's great.
So,
Were you
which was
trying
very
to
cool.
get a novel published before the contest? Were you trying to pitch for other
Yeah.
novels and other stuff like that as well? Or was it like you just were like, hey, there's this contest. I should try it. And then you were just like all in?
Interestingly enough, at that time, I was already involved doing a series of nonfiction books with my mother. So we had a contract with a company called Schroeder in Kentucky to do the collector's guides to children's books.
Okay.
And I think we were on book 3 or book 4. We did about 5 for them over the years. And I had a writing group where I was doing fiction, mostly short fiction. And one of the gals in my writing group turned around to me and said, "Well, you're not serious about writing." And I was like, "What?" She goes, "Well, you never submit anything. You're not serious." Like, I
Oh,
didn't know whether I was supposed to leave the group at that point or what, but it was a very odd moment. And I just was like, wait a minute. I like literally at that point had 1,000 newspaper articles published because I've been writing, for
right,
several years during these columns. And I'd had like, I think at that point, 3 or 4 nonfiction books published,
right,
one on my own and 3 with my mom. And I'm thinking, but I'm very serious about writing. Like I have all these publications credits. Yeah, well, you're not doing anything. So I set off a short story I had uh, that was science fiction to something called the Phobos contest, which no longer exists. And lo and behold, they wrote me back and they said, "You're going to be in this anthology, edited by Kevin J. Anderson. Um, and you get $1,000 first prize."
nice.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. I was like, and it was actually a year that I did not have a ton of money, and that $1,000 come in at Christmas, which is what it ended up doing, was really, really welcome. And I was like, hmm, I guess people do kind of want to read my fiction. That was my
Yeah,
my my big affirmation. So then I ran into the Wizards of the Coast guys at a couple of conventions, and they kept talking about how they were trying to get in new writers, and they really wanted more women to write for them.
yeah,
Because I think they were down to like one woman, maybe no women. I don't know. It was I think about the time Elaine Cunningham
yeah.
had actually stepped away to go work on some other stuff. And so I was sort of like, so I know D&D. I like sword and sorcery. I always kind of that was what I wanted to write. So I was like, so how do I get in with you guys? And they said, well, send a self-addressed stamped envelope. Which again, I think this was like the end of the self-addressed stamped
Right,
envelopes
right.
because what I got back was a form letter that said, go to our website. This is a URL, and it had the URL about like
Explaining what a
how to
URL
apply.
is for
Yeah, they did. They almost explained what a URL is in the letter. So I got the feeling like they weren't too sure. And of course, I was already working at that point online, and I was actually editing websites for the opera company. So I was like, okay, I can do that. So I get on there, and then the URL led me to the Maiden of Pain contest. And I was like, okay, I had good luck with one contest. And this one again, there is no entry fee.
Yeah.
There is nothing to stop me from trying. So I
Yeah.
guess I will try. And like I said, that one I did not win. I got a letter back saying, no, basically to my idea. But it also said, we really like your writing because they'd asked for a sample. And so we'll put you on the short list. And that was how then I kept getting, like, we are going to do some short stories for the Realms of Dragons anthology. And the short story I pitched, they did take, and I did
Yeah.
write. And then they asked for pitches for, I remember the Ghostwalker, which, of course, I sent in a Ghostwalker pitch. Eric's got to be sent in a
Right.
Ghostwalker pitch. They bought Eric's, which was probably much, much better than mine. Because again, I was still a little foggy on what exactly they were looking for in D&D.
Right.
And but that led me to kind of knowing Eric because we had gone back and forth, I think, around the contest time and about Realms of Dragons because we were both in that anthology. And so I got to meet him. And when he said I got the Ghostwalker, I said, oh, I didn't. But but that's okay. Let's meet for coffee. And we kind of, started being buds after that. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Eric's a great guy. What
Yeah,
were some
he's
of your
really good.
challenges that you had then that you've overcome to now, like over the course of your career?
I think certainly when they accepted Crypt of the Moaning Diamond, um, I I had sort of noodled around with writing a sword and sorcery type novel because I that's the kind of fantasy I like, and I was reading at the time. So I sort of I had kind of like had written several chapters of the thing, but I'd never written a complete novel.
Right.
And so signed for the Crypt contract, and it happened to be concurrent with a contract with Schroeder, where we were doing essentially the collected collector's guide. So we were taking all of our past volumes and putting them into one book called the Encyclopedia of Collectible Children's Books, and that was a nightmare because we had started writing almost 10 years previously.
Okay.
And have you ever tried to like open up 10 years worth of backups? Um, one of the things to know, children, when before the cloud, you used to back up on physical medium,
Yeah.
and the physical medium kept changing. So all of a sudden, I had zip disks. I had 3.5 inch discs. We were always on Macs, luckily. I had thumb drive. I mean, I had all these
Yeah.
different freaky pieces that we had our backups on. We're trying to pull them all into one dock. And of course, they're all in different versions of Word, which
You
did
need like
not want to
five
pull.
different computers and
Oh, and they didn't want to talk
transfers.
to each other. And I remember like one version wouldn't open on anything except this one Mac that was dying, and all we could do was we could open. It wouldn't work if you open the screen totally, but if you open the screen like that much, it would come on, and then I
Oh
could
no.
shove the whatever it was into it. I could pull the dock, and then I could shove it onto something else. It was just oh, it was a
Oh,
mess.
crazy.
So I am better about backing up. I've learned that since. And I've learned to like update periodically my backups just into whatever the current version of whatever is out there that I'm using as a word processor.
Okay.
Um, so that's one thing I've learned. But the other thing I guess I learned with Crypt of the Mountain Diamond is I can actually write a book from chapter one to final chapter in the end. Which I signed a contract and said I'd do it, and then I
Yeah.
started and went, "Oh my gosh!" But this is where my mother, being a writer, she was a great backup.
That's
I
great.
was literally throwing. She was literally emailing sections of the encyclopedia to me to proof, and I was emailing her my chapters. The
Okay.
trade-off was, okay, you get my chapters from Crypt this week. Proof them and tell me if you
Yeah.
whatever do you think is going to be a problem. So somebody came up to me at Worldcon, told me how much they had loved Crypt when they were 12 years old. And after I got over the shock of looking to this 30-year-old woman and going, huh, It really has been that long, hasn't it?
Right.
She said my favorite scene was the rust monster. If you know the book, there's a scene where the guy in really shiny armor gets attacked by a rust monster. And I said, well, I owe that one 100% to my mother, who knows absolutely nothing about D&D. But she was sitting there editing my book and going, well, honey, you need to have him have some setback here. Something has to happen in this chapter. He has to have a bigger problem than you've given him.
Right.
And she had a copy of the Monster Manual that I had left with her because she could proof with that, right? She
Yeah,
could
yeah,
check the
because you could
names.
look things up. The yeah.
Yeah, and she'd said, like, I don't get what any of these names are. So I said, well, here, I'll leave you my Monster Manual. And so I literally got this email that said, I think you need to have him attacked by a rust monster. And I'm like, first of all, I'm going, Mom, that's brilliant. And like, how do you even know about rust monsters? So I'm reading through your book here, and I saw this thing, and he has shiny armor, so shiny armor, rust monster makes
Yeah,
sense, which tells you a lot about her sense of humor, which is very close to mine. And and I just said that's great. So I wrote the rust monster, and I sent her back that scene, and she's like, yeah, that's what you needed.
that's awesome.
So
That's great.
that
And
was that
to
was
know
that
that
was
in
my
the end, people are, remember that scene.
and people remember that scene. Yeah, it was a silly scene. He's down to his leather briefs, as it were, by the end of that scene.
What
And
if what
I
about your process has changed? Because it's been a while. You've been doing this for a little while. What about your
um
process from that first submission to D&D all the way to now?
to the latest Arkham Horror,
Yeah.
yeah.
How's your process change making books?
It is stayed the same, but gotten a little bit easier.
Okay.
So, as I tell people, every single thing I have had published, all my nonfiction, all my fiction, except for the short stories, but all of my novels have been sold on a pitch. So, I have had an editor come to me and say, okay, we need a novel in this line, in Arkham Horror, for example. Give us three ideas. And so I will write one paragraph ideas and send them off, and they will go, nope, nope. Oh, yeah, this one. So Arkham Horror started with Silent Movie Crew films in a haunted house. That was Mask of Silver. That was the very first Arkham Horror I sold. And there were probably five other pitches on the page I sent to them.
Okay.
And then they go and they say, okay, give me a 1 page to 2 page outline of the book. And that I totally learned from Wizards of the Coast because, as I said, they rejected me a lot before they
Right.
bought the first novel. And at one point, I actually wrote to one of the editors and I said, what do I do? Because you keep saying how much you like my writing, but you keep saying no to my ideas. So where am I failing? And I tried to put it very much on what can I do to um, be better. So it wasn't like, why are you people keep rejecting me? It was more like, what can I do
Yeah.
to get across the goal line?
What am I missing?
And
Yeah.
what am I missing? Yeah, I wasn't like, why are you not recognizing how brilliant I am? But that was not what I said. I said, what can I do to? And he said, keep the outline simple. I just want to know who the main character is, what their external conflict is, what their internal conflict is, and how they solve those two things. I don't want to know how it relates to D&D. I figure you'll figure that out. I don't want to know the subplots. I know you'll put them in as you're writing a novel. I don't even want to know who their friends and supporters are unless it's really key to how they solve those two problems. So that was how I wrote the outline for Crypt of the Moaning Diamond. And that was the one they bought. And that is how I've written every single outline since. This is the main character. This is what the external thing is that they are trying to do. Solve the mystery, survive the attack of Cthulhu, whatever it is. And this is their internal problem. And in the case of Mask of Silver, it's um, come to peace with their relationship with their sister. Because that book
Okay.
is a lot about two sisters, one of whom is having to essentially pass as white. So Mask of Silver, which is very true of silent movies, the older sister is passing as white so she can be a leading lady. And the younger sister, who is obviously Chinese American and is um, her costume designer, but she's not as acknowledged as her sister, even though the two of them are actually very close. And she understands why her older sister is doing this. She is accepting of it, but it's also very difficult for her because she's having to sort of hide her family relationship. And so, how she resolves that internally is part of the book, as well as how does she get all of her friends and her sister out of this haunted house before the crazy director kills them all.
Yeah.
So those were my two conflicts, and that's kind of what I focused on when I sold my first book to Arkham Horror too. And again, that came back very quickly. They went, "Oh yeah, we love this because it's addressing a whole lot of things on a different levels,
Yeah.
plus being a good adventure story."
Yeah. Is the process different for you, or is the storytelling formula different from you when you go from fantasy to horror?
Um, Not oh, yes and no. So the fantasy, I think the D&D it was very much it's high octane action and Crypt of the Moaning Diamond. Every book is very different for me because I'm trying to do something fun for myself as a writer. So
Okay.
I was trying to write a very fast action book with Crypt where all the action actually happens within 24 hours. Don't do this to yourself as a writer, especially if it's your first novel. It was really very, very I pulled it off. I think I pulled it off, but and fans have been very kind about that book, but I've ever since gone like, why did I do that for my first novel? I mean, I made it really tough on me. Second book, I am an avowed lover of Gothics. I love, and when I say Gothic, I mean mid 20th century girl in a nightie running from a haunted house with a light in the window, and City of the Dead, which is about the daughter in the family who takes care of the City of the Dead, the graveyard in Waterdeep, is my homage to the Gothic. I mean, there's a spooky house, only we find out actually the family that lives in it is really nice. Um, there are ghosts, there's graves, there's there's quicksand. I mean, like I threw in everything I loved about the
Yeah.
Gothic novel in that book, and I had a lot of fun writing it. Arkham kind of was the same thing. I had a hard time with. I swear, I went like, why are you giving me that? They had several different properties at Aconite when I first applied to them, and I was like, oh, they're going to give me one of the fantasy properties, right? Because like I had this fantasy background, and they're like, no, we really like the Arkham horror idea. And it's sort of thrown in as a like, okay, I've always wanted to write about the 1920s and silent movies, but I'm not a big horror reader. I am not good at gore. I'm really squeamish.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, how do I do this? Then I started reading um, what influenced, I mean, it's Lovecraftian, but it's gone a long way from that.
Yeah.
But what influenced Lovecraft was Chambers, King in Yellow, which I don't know if you ever read that collection, but those are incredible stories. They were written in I want to say the late 1890s. He has one sort of future story that's set in the 1920s in that collection,
Yeah.
which would actually be the future for him. They're very still chilling to these days, and a really interesting psychological. Because a lot of it's like, is this real or is this guy just completely nuts
Right.
telling this story? And there's kind of this weird edge to them. I was reading those, and at the same time, I was thinking of my absolute favorite. Um, Writer of the 1920s. She started in the 1920s and then continued on, was a woman named Mary Roberts Reinhardt, who is most famous among mystery fans for inventing the "Had I But Known" murder mystery formula. And the "Had I But Known" always starts out as "Had I but known the house was haunted, I would never have taken it for my summer vacation,"
Right.
which is kind of how her book, The Bat, also known as The Circular Staircase, and possibly the inspiration for Batman, just to let you know about Miss
Just saying.
Reinhardt's
Yeah. You're
deep,
just saying.
deep, yes. Also, a very early science fiction horror film, very early silent film, horror film, very early Broadway play, horror, mystery, comedy. She kind of mixed all genres in her writing. and was adapted. I mean, she was they were the Circular Staircase, which became the Bat, was big on Broadway, big on in the silent films. That became sort of a when I started trying to figure like how am I going to get into this milieu, which is Arkham Horror. How am I going to do it? And like, how am I going to get that voice that's going to, I'm going to be able to sort of lure you in and scare you and yet get you out with a reasonably happy ending because I like to have a
Right.
reasonably happy ending.
Yeah.
And it became a had I but known. It starts with her saying, had I but known what a terrible idea this was that Sydney was going to film in his family home in Arkham, I would have never let my sister go there. And it sort of continues on from there. And that was kind of the key for me diving into Arkham was to do it, which I'd never written before, which was first person, and to give it that kind of I'm telling you a story. I'm telling you a story about a mistake I made, and then it ended up being really scary for me and my friends. So that's the Had I But Known, and I thank goodness Mrs. Reinhardt invented that formula because it was really really helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was kind of the difference. So the interesting thing was the first three Arkham Horror books I did were all first person because for me, first person became the way I could scare those gals because they didn't know what was coming next, and you, as the reader, only saw their viewpoint
Right.
of what was coming next. And then I flipped that all up for the latest Arkham Horror book, which was Nightmare Quest of April May, which is based on the Drowned City expansion. And there I have four point of view characters, and it's all told in third person. And that was again kind of a challenge, but that was just given the territory I needed to cover and what I wanted to do with that story. That became the way to tell that story.
Yeah.
And I was a little surprised when I sort of started drafting it because I had really thought it would be another first person, mostly from April's viewpoint. But then I realized early on that Harvey Walters, who's an actual investigator in the game, needed his time in the sun. Harvey needed to tell things from his point of view. And then Carolyn Fern insisted on telling her point of view. And then after that, we were off to the races.
Have you played the actual Arkham Horror game a lot, or once or twice? Not at all.
Not a lot. I had played the board game more than the card game. Since I got into writing, I have played that card game and I've watched a lot of Twitch. Thank you guys for playing online because every time I got confused, I go watch a game. And I love the cards. I mean, I have the cards. I mean,
Yeah.
I've like been buying cards. I bought the Drowned City expansion. Just all that stuff because it's so cool to be able to see that stuff. And then they've expanded so much in the. I started writing for them in really 2020. What a peculiar year that was, and and they've really expanded since then. So there's now the ArkhamHorror.com website, which was not around when I first started writing to them,
Right.
which has all sorts of cool stuff that's been from all the different contributors, and including a couple of news stories from me, which just got put up there and when the omnibus came out. And so, yeah, that's been really fun. It's been fun to watch that world grow. And it's also been fun to see like books like Welcome to Arkham came out. And Nick, who is the amazing designer for that, and has a really funny sense of humor, and was sending me notes like, go to page such and such, look there. And it's like, I open it up and I go, oh, you did the newspaper that I'm talking about in this book. And you've got the story about Nova Malone in it and all that stuff. And so, yeah, he worked with the guys who put that together just did an amazing job, and they pulled in stuff from all the books that have been published up to that point into Welcome
I was gonna
to
say,
Arkham.
could ask you if you could pull behind the curtain because there are tie-ins between like the books and the game, and there's
Yeah.
like little things. Do they go, hey, we want you to put this in the story because we have this thing we want to put in the game, or is it you put something in the book and then afterwards they put it into the game?
It originally started out more like, hey, we just want you to expand the world of Arkham and give us a story that's set in the same milieu and make the investigators very, um, I want to say cameo characters. Like they
Okay.
weren't really given you know, I think there was a little nervousness about letting the writers loose with their actual investigator characters.
Yeah.
So I remember like the first book, it was like, oh, they can be a cameo, but they can't be. an actual character sort of
Yeah.
thing, and that was fine. And I wrote that way. And then the second book, with Deadly Grimoire, I had proposed that Betsy Baxter, flapper detective, stunt girl actress, who's kind of a mix of Mary Pickford, Clara Bow, um, was going to take flying lessons from Winnie Habermock, who's an actual investigator, and then she was going to go back to Arkham because of that flying lesson. And I literally got a note from the company going, could Winnie be her chum and go with her and investigate with her? And I was like, oh yeah, I want Winnie. No, that's fine. I'll take Winnie.
Yeah.
So they've gotten much more into that as we've gotten along, and and I think it's a relationship thing. Like as they know that I am not going to um break the world. I always say, like, I'm not one of those writers who's going to be out there breaking the world. They've been more and more like, oh yeah, you could use this investigator, you could use this, and that's fine. So, but yes, they do check everything. I do always say to people, I mean, it's a very collaborative process
Yeah.
writing for IPs. So I do, I mean, I certainly had that when I was working for Wizards too, but particularly with Aconite and then with Fantasy Flight Games, who owns the property Arkham Horror. There's a lot of people behind the scenes checking what I do and making sure I don't bust something. And they
Yeah.
send me nice notes, and they're always nice notes. I mean, like I said, I occasionally will get a, yeah, please don't do this because this contradicts what Tim Pratt's doing over there
Right,
in
right.
his trilogy or something like that. But that's fine.
Tell us about the omnibus, the Visions and Nightmares
Visions and
omnibus.
Nightmares omnibus. So the omnibus is the first three novels that I wrote, which loosely form what we have called the Fitzmaurice legacy, which is Sidney Fitzmaurice. The first book, Mask of Silver, starts with Sidney Fitzmaurice drags his little film crew off to Arkham to film in his family home on French Hill, which is just a bad, bad idea from the very start, and it gets worse. So, but it turns out Sydney comes from a long line of Fitzmaurices who probably meddled in things they shouldn't have. Dun,
Right.
dun, dun. Um, Second book, Deadly Grimoire. Betsy Baxter, who we meet in Silver Mask as a young kind of friend of the heroine, and she's like one of the kind of the bit players. Um, by now, it's 3 years later. Betsy has become the star of her own stunt-filled serial called The Flapper Detective, and her boyfriend Max was one of the people who disappeared in Silver Mask. There's rumors of Max being seen again, and so she goes back to Arkham with Winnie Habermock, aviator without fear, and meets a guy named Tom Sweets, who's a bookseller of occult volumes, including something called the Deadly Grimoire. And Tom's gotten himself into a bit of a pickle with that. And they meet the bootlegger Nova Malone, and all things, are very, very complicated. But Betsy does make it back to Hollywood. And the third book is Bootlegger's Dance, which is in the omnibus, is actually more, interestingly enough, kind of veers a bit, although there's a little bit in it from Silver. There is a character in it that was in Silver Mask. Most people have forgotten that character was in Silver Mask. I
Well, they'll
sort of
know
forgot that.
now. They'll know now.
No, no, no. So anyway, yes. So one of the main characters in Bootlegger's Dance uh, was impacted by Sydney's decisions, and we learn more about him and what has happened to him since the filming of Silver Mask. And we also that was interest. That was kind of fun for me. That was flipping the villain to the hero because Nova Malone goes from being the villain in Deadly Grimoire to being Raquel's really nice aunt who's helping her out. She's also still a bootlegger and she's still running a dance hall, but she's we see her from a different viewpoint, which was really fun for me. And I will say what largely came about because several fans wrote to me and said, we know she's the villain, but we really like Nova Malone, and are you ever going to bring her back? Because she falls off a pier at the end of Deadly Grimoire. So there's a little bit of a spoiler. Um,
Spoilers.
Spoilers. So yeah, so she comes back. So that's what the omnibus is. The omnibus is the first three novels, And then because it was coming out about the same time as the game expansion, Film Fatale, I was asked if I could write a short story for Film Fatale and with Betsy, and they would put it in the omnibus and they would put it up on the Arkham Horror site. And I proposed again two ideas. I always pitch a couple ideas.
Hmm.
And that was the one where they came back and they said, well, we like both ideas. So could you do two short stories? I'm like, sure, no
Sure.
problem, guys, because I love Betsy. And so the two short stories, which now appear up on the ArkhamHorror.com website, if you've already read the three novels, you can go read the two short stories, are a bit of a coda to the first two books. So it kind of tells you a little bit more about how people are doing after the events of Mask of Silver and Deadly Grimoire. We know a little bit more about how Jeannie and her boyfriend are doing. We know a little bit more how Betsy is doing. And so that was fun to do. And it also kind of let me wrap up a couple of little teeny loose ends that had been bugging me. So I got to go in there and do that and introduce some characters from Film Fatale.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Do you have any other projects coming out? Any other things that you can talk about that you'd like
That I can
to
talk
tell
about.
that you can want to tell
Okay, I'm
people
going to
about?
say turn your eyes to ArkhamHorror.com. There will be some announcements in September,
Okay.
but I can't talk about them yet.
Okay.
But I spend a summer putting together some stuff as well as the omnibus stuff. And also, I am working on a revised edition of a short story collection called John Safar. It's been published before, but this one will come out in a new ebook edition with an additional story. There'll be a seventh story of the six stories, and I'm adding a seventh. And there'll be a new print edition, which will be a large print edition because I honestly have terrible eyesight. I find regular reading print is, I can read it, but it's getting less comfortable. I have a few friends and relatives who really can't read it at all and love large print books. And so it's been kind of a passion of mine to try to
Yeah.
get this out in large print. I have a designer friend who's been experimenting with some stuff along this line. So
Excellent.
I'm really pleased that we're going to be able to do a large print edition, and I'm hoping it'll be out before Christmas.
Cool. Cool. People can find you at Flights of Foundry September 26th through 28th,
Hmm.
but you're not quite sure what the schedule is yet, so
No,
people
they
can stay
haven't
tuned.
totally published their schedule. I know Liza Foundry is a free, so anybody want to go over there and take a look at them. It's an absolutely 100% free 3-day convention. Goes 24 hours a day, so it doesn't matter what time zone you're in. You can find something to participate in. A lot of it is group discussions. There's some panels like a regular convention and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's really fun. I have proposed a couple of group discussions. One is 125 years of the Wizard of Oz from Wizard to Wicked. So if you think that sounds like fun, go and sign up for that
Yeah.
because they will. It's how many people sign up for it, whether or not it actually makes it to the final schedule. And I also have one on the Gothics called uh, when you say Gothic, you mean 19th century literature, and when I say Gothic, I mean 20th century paperbacks. So, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome.
So,
Cool, cool, cool. Of course, you're going to be at Norwestcon probably. You said you tend to
I'm
try to always
usually,
be there.
I try to be at Norwestcon. I actually went back for the first time in many years this year in 2025. Peggy and Rob run an amazing conference. If you've ever been down there, this is Seattle's kind of big, long-lasting science fiction fantasy. It's certainly the first science fiction fantasy convention I ever went to. Again, way back in the day, in my college days in the '80s was Norwestcon, and I dropped in and out of it many, many times over the decades. I was thrilled to be invited back as a guest last year, or which actually ended up being this for 2025. So the invitation came out in 2024, and was talking to them at Worldcon and assuring them, yes, I was coming back for 2026.
I think 2026's dates are April 2nd through the 5th
Hmm.
in
Yeah,
2026.
and
So,
that's going to be an amazing convention because the guest of honor is T. Kingfisher,
okay.
who's one of those writers who I will be complete gushing fangirl if I'm on any panels with her. But
Nice.
yeah, she's amazing. You have to go read her stuff.
That's great. People can find you and any other upcoming events at rosemaryjones.com, correct?
Yes.
And of course, your social medias are all there on the website. You're on Blue Sky at rosemaryjones.bluesky.social, on X at Rosemary Jones, and the fun one is at Instagram at lost_loves_books, which you were telling me a fun little story about that before we got
Yeah,
started. So,
that's because that dates back all again all that back in the days when we were writing guides to collecting children's books. We were actually purchasing a lot of books just so we could photograph them for these guides. So we ended up with kind of my mom and I both had sort of overflowing bookshelves of late 19th century, early 20th century children's fiction, some of which will never leave because some of it I adore.
right.
But over the years, we've also gotten into, we've been on the book selling sites. So Biblio and A Libris are where you can find me as Lost Loves Books, and I'm selling off a bit of the collection
So,
just so I have room for the rest of stuff
right.
that's coming in.
Right. So people can go out and find you at all those locations. Rosemary, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Of course, anybody who's in the live stream, please stick around for the live audience Q&A where you get to ask your questions and we're going to answer them. So please stick around for that. Of course,
This is
everyone
where I
who's
go for the
listening,
water.
no problem.
Sorry.
Of course, everyone listening, coming up on Epic Realms, Stephen Shend is an author, editor, and game designer. He's also worked on the Forgotten Realms, Mutants and Masterminds, Pathfinder, and so many more. So Stephen Shend is going to be joining us. That episode will be live September 15th. The podcast will hit feeds on September 16th. So like, follow, subscribe, rate, review, push all of the buttons, help us out, say all the nice things about us on all the social media, respond to us there, all of the things. It definitely helps us and in turn helps our guests. So for Rosemary Jones, I am Nick, and I want to say thank you all for listening to
Oh,
Epic
thank you.
Realms.